Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome once again to part two of tonight's edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. And our focus is now going to be on Iran 100 days into the US-Israel attack on Iran. And the question arises is, has military superiority guaranteed what Western assumptions have been made about a swift victory, about severe military pressure and infrastructure devastation that would cause rapid regime collapse in Iran or even trigger a pro-Western domestic uprising? While we know this has not happened, 100 days later, at this point in time, the American-Israel plan has actually resulted in what we know as a global stalemate. And we're joined this evening by Dr. Ali Alsayegh, who is a Middle East scholar and analyst, no stranger to Salam Media, and also a pleasure to have Hassen Seria, Press TV correspondent in South Africa. To both my guests, Dr. Ali and Hassen Seria, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome and Jazakallah khair and so much for your time.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Dr. Ali, let's begin with you. And obviously, we've had this discussion in the past as well, talking about Iran and the situation in the Gulf region. But looking at where we are 100 days later, what are some of your observations?
Well, to start off, I think we should definitely highlight that Iran, given what has happened over the past 100 days, has actually become stronger than what it was before these 100 days. On February 26, 2026, Iran did not have control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran did not have so much leverage against the United States. It was willing to give up on its premium enriched uranium. It was willing to negotiate with the United States regarding this. But given what has happened, I think the United States has really strategically miscalculated every step of the way. There has been a lot of confusion in terms of Donald Trump's rhetoric, as well as his statements about the ongoing state of the war. We've heard at least 37 times that the United States is close to finding a negotiated settlement with Iran. And until today, it's been 72 days since his first announcement of that kind, and we still haven't found a negotiated settlement. That is number one. Number two, we see that Iran has now gotten to a point, putting aside the Strait of Hormuz, they've gotten to a point for the first time in their history, and arguably the history of the Middle East, there is another country that is attacking Israel in response to Israel's attacks on a third country. And that is a huge moment, because it reflects that Iran has the leverage, has the power to put forward new red lines that are not confined to its borders. And it's also threatening to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And it wouldn't have gotten to this point unless Donald Trump and the United States have been constantly miscalculating this war. And I'll get later on, we'll talk a little bit about why this actually feeds into what Israel may have wanted this whole time. But it goes without saying that even though the US and Israel were the ones that illegally engaged in aggression against Iran, killed those children in that school, attacked civilian infrastructure, Iran has nevertheless, they have a right to respond to the United States. They have a right to respond to Israel, but they certainly, I don't think, have a right to target civilian infrastructure in the Gulf, which my country, Kuwait, and a lot of other Gulf countries have been dealing with. And I think it should be said that the Gulf has been taking strides to maintain this strategic patience, not responding, the majority of the Gulf countries not responding to the Iranian aggression so as not to become a front in this war, which would allow Israel and the United States to take a back seat and turn this war from an Iran, Israel, and US war to an Iran Gulf war.
Yes, Hassan, just to follow up from what Dr. Ali says and looking at Iran 100 days after the war, clearly this has been as a victory and a triumph of survival for Iran because that obviously has been paramount as well. But also at the same time, looking at two superpowers, the United States of America, so called superpower of the world, Israel, so called superpower in the Middle East region, and for Iran to achieve what it has 100 days later. And as I mentioned, it's resulted in a stalemate as we're sitting right now when one talks about the ceasefire or peace, any peace effort or initiative. And we knew that this was actually going to be a war of attrition as well as to who could hold out longer.
Indeed, I think there's so many factors, and I think Dr. Alsayegh had started out with looking at the United States, and I think that is the first thing that is uh, very clear from not just the war itself, but even post the war. This is the active phase of the war, the hot war as such, that led after that sort of 30 days of the bombing campaign and Iran's reaction as well, or retaliation to that is that the United States is no longer the superpower. It is a power now that can be challenged. And I think when we look at that a bit more broadly, it changes the way in which we look at the world. Of course, when the Russian assault in Ukraine began, people started talking about a unipolar world. And I think this Iranian strike is what brings us closer to that reality. A multipolar world, and I think also one in which a new front emerges. And that is, apart from the Western front, which is the United States, perhaps Europe, NATO as such, then we look at the East, we look at China, we look at Russia. But there's an Islamic front here that has demonstrated, despite the imagination after the genocide that was carried out in the Gaza Strip, the assault on Hezbollah, the understanding or the impression that the resistance there had been diminished, the fall of the Assad government in Syria as well, that the resistance front had become fragmented and Iran was now to stand alone. The fact that Iran has withstood for this period, this 100-day period, indicates that this is to a degree another front that is emerging as a power in the world. Now, of course, Iran, I think, still has some way to go before it can say that it's consolidated that position as a power within the region or on the global stage as well. But the mere fact that, as you mentioned, it was these two major powers, the United States, seen as or accepted as being a superpower, and then Israel, the power that was supposed to have the invincible army, that Iran has withstood against them, and even up to this moment is showing that in the event that these two powers surpass any of the red lines, that Iran is still willing to go ahead and carry out strikes. I think this gives us an indication of the changes. I think on the regional level, we see, of course, Pakistan emerging here as a very important broker within the region, and this naturally is also going to take up the or escalate the or elevate the Pakistani role and their position in the international sphere as well. And I think from the Persian Gulf countries here, there's an important recalibration that may happen. It may not happen with all of them, but I think there are considerations and there are sort of assessments that are being done within these countries to the degree that we even have Saudi Arabia, for example, proposing some sort of a non-aggression pact that it can sign with the Iranian side as well. So I think these are all of the factors which sort of reshapes the world that we are looking at, that we can assess from this 100-day period thus far in now.
Yes, and also, Dr. Ali, when one talks about one lessons that one can actually take from these 100 days, and just to try and unpack the Iranian mindset and the psyche of the Iranian mind when they were attacked by the United States and by Israel, and immediately Iranians realized that this was going to be about survival over subjugation and sustaining that military pressure. And at the same time, in terms of nationalism that featured very prominently as well, where the United States assumed that there would be a quick in and out, there would be regime change that would be effected almost immediately, which didn't happen, but also the willpower of the people. This is important. Willpower over weaponry. And this is featured very, very strongly. And in this alone, it tells us that there is a huge lesson, especially when the sovereignty of a country is under threat.
And I think you make a lot of really important points. Let me start off with talking a little bit about willpower. When a country, such as Iran and other countries, are faced with existential crisis, where the question of their survivability is one of to be or not to be, it is natural, especially with a country that has gone through so much, to for the people to bind together with the state and remain for as a resilient and formidable force. We've seen this, and this is not supposed to be something that's shocking. We've seen this in the Iran-Iraq war. We've seen it for years during the sanctions against Iran by the United States. Iran has also, and I don't want to try to put forward this argument that there is a certain sense of exceptionalism. There is also a media strategy behind that sort of resilience. When we start to think about a little bit, why did Iran shut down the internet for so long? Why did it block so many videos of the destruction that happened in Iran during the course of this war? And there has been a lot of destruction. Thousands of innocent civilians have been killed. But they made sure that those videos did not come out. And there is a reason for this. It is because Iran is not Gaza. Iran will not win this war through the sympathy of the global audience towards the innocents that are being killed. In the Gazan situation, it was important for those videos, for those pictures of these poor children that were maimed, killed, and injured, even tortured, to come out to the world, because it stimulated that sense of sympathy, that compassion. But it also was something that put forward this image of a subject, a person, a group of people that required the compassion of the world. Iran makes sure that videos like this do not come out, and that reflects that they see themselves as an equal party in this war. It does not seek to show the hardships that the civilians are going through. There are a lot of narratives about resilience, about solidarity, about how they are able to go through all of this pain, seemingly without needing even to break a sweat. And that is important. Their media strategy has been par excellence, if I'm going to be honest with you, and they have been winning the narrative war against the United States. And in terms of a very important point that was put forward by Hassen, and it's it's a point that needs to be talked about a little bit more, which is Gulf recalibration. The Gulf recalibration of what they see as a duplicitous, increasingly seeing as a duplicitous United States that's not putting the Gulf interest above their interest or the Israeli interest, is, I think, there to see. There are discussions happening as we speak about how we can envision a region in the future absent of this the role of the United States, which I think has been far more problematic than it has solved issues. And that will require finding a negotiated settlement and a security apparatus that is inclusive of Iran, where the Gulf and Iran can cooperate with one another as equal partners and move past what I think is a very dark part in the history between the Gulf and Iran in terms of their relations. And certainly, I think this war has only gone forward to accelerate the decline of the United States. There is a reason why Barack Obama, George Bush, have not, and other presidents have not gone into this war with Iran, because it was always going to be a suicide mission. And Trump has really fell into the trap of what Israel has constantly whispered into his ear. And perhaps later on we can talk about how the decline of the United States and the losses of the United States in the context of this war actually in the end benefit the interests of Israel, particularly as it pertains to the Greater Israel Project.
Absolutely. In fact, Dr. Ali, I actually want to touch on that as well. And also, I think just a bit more in terms of the, when you speak about the Gulf state, the realignment as far as the Gulf state is concerned, because I think that's a very, very critical discussion, particularly looking at the region. But Hassen, I think just coming back in terms of Iran, and we know that at this point in time, peace and peace talks remain elusive, at every turn of events. And once again, and I think I raised this issue previously, I'm not too sure, Dr. Ali, you were one of my panelists at that point in time, where I said Donald Trump seems to be negotiating with himself only and nobody else. And, that is the point that I've been making. But throughout this period, we've seen Iran manage to retain stability by demonstrating continuity. And this is what they've done consistently. But also at the same time, looking at Iran that has openly defied, that have rejected U.S. demands for unconditional surrender, which is what the United States of America has wanted. And this obviously is, speaks highly of Iran in terms of how they've even approached this on a diplomatic front. Hassen.
Indeed. I think when we look at the Iranian system here, and as it was envisioned after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, the system that was put in place was a robust system. And I think this talks to Iranian heritage, Iran as a civilization, that you have multiple spheres of government, you have multiple bodies, multiple councils that all ensure that there are checks and balances in place. At the same time, the Iranian political system as such, I know that, the dismissive sort of attitude in the West is that it is the regime of the mullahs, as if it is a system that is just run with people following a certain theocratic sort of outlook, and based on whatever they read or how hardline that sort of outlook is, that is what informs the way in which they run the government. But the Iranian political system itself is a very sort of cutthroat system as well, and I think that is what we've got to take into cognizance here, because that then gives us a broader understanding of exactly why the Iranian system has managed to continue with this level of continuity, despite the amount of high-level assassinations that we saw, not just during the February-March campaign or strikes against the country, but also during June of last year, that there is a system in place that the Iranians have been preparing for since after the 1979 revolution, that to bring them up to this point. And I think that is the important aspect here. I think, like Dr. Alsayegh said as well, the fact that the Americans and the Israelis went out with this attack, they have actually undone whatever domestic sort of opposition they may have wanted to rely on to see the overthrow of the government in Iran. They have actually instead turned that sort of support, or allowed it to consolidate the support for the government in place. What they gave the Iranians an opportunity to do here is to demonstrate that this is a government that has been actively working, despite the economic problems, despite whatever criticisms there are of the political system or the political laws within the country, that this is a government that has been working to protect the national pride of the country. And when we look at, I mean, we're talking about 100 days, and for 100 days, people have been coming out every night in the streets of Iran, across the country, in support of the government. One would have thought, if one thinks of a case like South Africa, after a week, after 2 weeks, you will see those numbers fizzling out. You will see it dying down. But that has not happened in Iran. And this is what the Americans and the Israelis have actually handed to the Iranian government, that they could achieve this sort of assurance to the public. And with that support from the public, in addition to, of course, whatever has been built up in terms of the military capability, the diplomatic capability, that is what ensures the continuity of the government. I think there's another element that the Iranians have been quite quietly going about as well, even though the understanding is that the talks with the Americans have stalled. After that first round of talks in Pakistan, there was a hope for a second round of talks. But the Iranians, again, very strategically here, if we remember and go back to that point, Donald Trump was saying that J.D. Vance was ready to get on the plane to fly to Pakistan. The Iranians had flown to Pakistan, but that was to meet with the Pakistanis, and then I think they went to Oman after that. And this was sort of one of those ways in which the Iranians again snubbed the Americans. So the Iranians have been working on this diplomatic mission of developing stronger ties with Pakistan, which they already enjoy, with Oman, with Qatar, with Saudi Arabia, with countries within the Gulf region that are willing to talk in order to forge ahead. For example, with the plan of what is the future of the Strait of Hormuz. We know that, and I think here we've also got to be a bit honest about the Iranian situation. The Iranians closed the Strait of Hormuz. Then they said, no, the Strait of Hormuz is open, but only to certain type of traffic. This is all new ground for the Iranians, and they are sort of working through it as the days go by as well. This is what this 100 days has been about as well. Now, because of, for example, UNCLOS, which controls or dictates the rules in terms of navigation through straits and so on, Iran is saying that the fees that are being charged for movement through the Strait of Hormuz is for certain services that are to be provided. So this is all new territory for the Iranians. Also, we should question, has the Iranian move with its control over the Strait of Hormuz and its cooperation with Oman in terms of this, has it been as successful as the Iranians wanted? Because at this point in time, traffic has not moved up, perhaps to the level that the Iranians would want it to be. Yes, we've seen, I think towards the end of May, we started seeing about 30% of traffic turning back. But again, with the latest skirmishes between the Americans and the Iranians, with the attacks on Israel as well, this is a volatile region, and we see the numbers dip again. So from that perspective, how much buy-in has there been on a global level? So the Iranians have been focusing on this diplomatic sort of mission within the region in order to get better buy-in, in order to reimagine the region as one without the American and foreign interference within that region. But also, I think we've got to be a little nuanced in terms of whether the Iranians thus far have actually achieved all of those goals, or whether there are still some things that the Iranians need to consider and try to work through in terms of how they actually get past that point. And I think this is what the Americans have been relying on. They were probably waiting for, at the 100-day point or after a certain period of time, the world would get frustrated with the Iranians for having this level of control over the Strait of Hormuz. China, for example, India, Russia, they need the strait to be open in order for flow of vital resources, oil and other vital resources. So I think the Americans were also relying on that, even some of their NATO partners, to become involved maybe in some sort of military way, militarily as well, within the strait, in order to try to force the opening of the strait. Of course, the fact that that hasn't happened, that also tells us about where the Americans stand as far as no longer being a superpower. So I think that it's quite interesting from both sides, and a
It
lot
is,
of
Hassan,
calculations
definitely.
that need
But
to be
also,
done.
I think, Hassan, Dr. Ali also spoke about the recalibration of the Gulf states. But also, I think, Dr. Ali, just following up from what Hassan is talking about NATO and Europe as well. And what we've seen is European strategic awakening as well, because this has actually forced Europe to rethink their reliance on the United States of America. And the fact that Donald Trump requested assistance from NATO, when Washington requested assistance from NATO, from Europe, from the European, from some of its Asian partners as well, to secure the Strait of Hormuz, they declined. And obviously, they characterize this war as being outside of their mandate.
That I think that's really indicative of the ongoing acceleration of not only the decline of American influence globally, but also the decline of the relationship with Europe. Donald Trump has not been kind in any way, shape, or form in terms of rhetoric nor policy when it comes to his European partners. In a lot of ways, he has also turned his back on that war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. And the Europeans, I think, have felt very resentful of that approach that Donald Trump has taken. And for them, I think their hands are already full with the war between Ukraine and Russia. They cannot afford another war in the Middle East. They can't join another war in the Middle East. At some point, Britain and France, I think it was about a month or a month and a half ago, started to send warships to the Middle East, but nothing came out of it. It was more of just a ploy to pressure the Iranians in the ongoing negotiations, to give off this message that the Europeans are somehow still going to come to the United States aid, and that is supposed to create some sort of a pressure on Iran to accept some of the concessions that the U.S. was demanding that they would accept. I think there's another very important point. I mean, if we move away from the topic of Europe, right now, what we're talking about, maybe in the first month of the war, we were talking about Iran surviving, but now we have gotten to a point where it is Iran trying to institutionalize an economic win, something that will allow them to not only survive but also thrive after this war, such as their control over the Strait of Hormuz. And indeed, the traffic is not as high as what it was prior to the war, but China is still using that waterway, bypassing the US blockade, going to Iran, getting the oil that they want and a lot of the resources that they can get from Iran, sometimes from the Gulf countries as well. And there are a lot of ships that go through the waterway and pay the Iranian toll. They call it now the environmental tax, which I think sounds a little bit better than a toll, but they are paying that, and Iran is benefiting from that. It's not the ultimate thing that they're trying to the ultimate level that they would like to reach, but now is a stage of institutionalizing that sort of control and building the framework to develop it further once the traffic gets back to the normal level that it was prior to the war. If it gets to that level, obviously, in the next couple of months, which I doubt, of course.
Yes, in fact, I think, I'm glad you actually mentioned this, Dr. Ali, because we've seen how effective the Iranian stranglehold has been on the Strait of Hormuz as well. And it's actually proved to be a devastating countermeasure that clearly has actually backfired. And we've seen the result as well. Oil prices, international inflation, which the world is actually battling to grapple with at this point in time. But Hassan, just coming back, and I'd like to focus a bit on, and now I'll ask Dr. Ali to comment as well, because I know you wanted to speak about some of the red lines when it comes to Israel particularly, and Hassan, just your thoughts, because while this has been taking place as well, Lebanon has been very hardly hit as well, and obviously, they've retaliated, they've responded as well, but we know what is taking place in the south of Lebanon as well. And just looking at the Israeli factor and the Israeli agenda, while these so-called peace talks are stalling or are not taking place, but Israel still continues regardless.
Well, I think from the Israeli side, and I think here particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, it is that he requires the war or a conflict to continue. I think also after the October 7th launch of the Al-Aqsa flood operation, the escalated campaign that the Zionist regime then launched after that, and when they saw that they could achieve the obliteration almost of the Gaza Strip without anyone saying anything. Yeah, I'm talking about the United States, of course, greenlighting it, Europe as well, not raising their voice, not taking any sort of action to halt this campaign of genocide. In fact, on the contrary, countries like Germany, countries like the UK, going and actually going after European citizens as well for making even just statements relating to Palestine. I think this gave the Benjamin Netanyahu sort of the green light to understand that even if they do now go ahead with this plan of creating Eretz Israel, of expanding the Israeli territories, that there won't be any sort of tangible sort of action that will be taken against them. And so that opens the way for their movement into Syria, into Lebanon, and then eventually we will likely see Jordan as well as even Egypt coming into the sphere here. Of course, the important thing was that from the Lebanese side, you had Hezbollah, and the imagination was that from the Israelis and the Americans at least, is that they had diminished the power of Hezbollah to the extent that it no longer posed a real threat. Of course, after this, the breakout of the latest war, Hezbollah demonstrated that that is not the case, that it does still bear real capacity and that it can pose a threat to the Zionist regime. So I think when we look at it within this context, that is the reality that Benjamin Netanyahu is sort of pushing ahead with here. I think there's an important speech as well that he made. This was at the United Nations in 2024. It was that Friday afternoon when the assassination of Sayyid Hassen Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, was carried out by the Israeli regime. There's one photo that was released from the United Nations, which was of Benjamin Netanyahu with his team, and this was supposed to be the photo that said this is when the instruction was given to go ahead with the strike to assassinate Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. Now, Hezbollah 2000, the year 2000 was a strategic win because that was the first time the Israeli regime's forces had been overcome. That was the first sort of victory as such for the Arabs. The notion of invincibility was eliminated. So eliminating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah in that attack was a strategic victory for the Israelis. And this announcement took place from the United Nations. The United Nations as such is almost a world government. This was the UN General Assembly, and everyone is of course meeting in New York. But in that speech, Benjamin Netanyahu makes a statement in which he says it's a warning to Iran that Israel has capacity in all parts of Iran, but he extends that to say, and all parts of the Middle East as well. And we see this followed up about a year later with a strike from the Israeli side on Qatar. Now, our understanding is that there are relations between the Qataris and the Israelis. I mean, the Israeli side has been sending representatives over to Qatar to even participate in the talks in order to try to find a ceasefire in Gaza. But this is where Israel is demonstrating that it is looking at itself as a regional power. And this is in the psyche of Benjamin Netanyahu. Of course, if we look at statements in recent days, Donald Trump, which of course is, I don't think it's something we should go by, but he's talking about the possibility of Benjamin Netanyahu not running for another term. But in Benjamin Netanyahu's mind and what he himself has said, he sees himself as the savior of Israel. In the Israeli psyche, there's the idea of that 80-year sort of limit for the existence of a Jewish state or a Jewish empire or a Jewish sort of control of a region. So all of these things come into play, and it's for this reason that this is the period in which this escalation for expansion is of such critical importance. And so from the Israeli side, irrespective of what the Americans would like, Israel needs to move ahead with this plan.
Ali wanted to bring the greater Israeli plan as well, and how this is actually played out as far as Israel is concerned. But before that, Dr. Ali, we need to just pay a few bills. I'm going for a quick ad break. We'll be back.
Searching for elite local and international investment and advisory services from an award-winning firm? Look no further than the Belmont Mayer Group, your gateway to unparalleled investment and wealth management. At Belmont Mayer, we believe in the art of wealth creation, a meticulous process fueled by our unwavering commitment to excellence. With a focus on providing elite alternative investments and quality advice, we also pride ourselves on maximizing value for our esteemed investors, as seen through our consistent outperformance. Your financial success is our top priority. Join us at Belmont Mayer and experience the difference firsthand. Ready to embark on a journey of greatness? Contact us today. Reach out to the Belmont Mayer Group on 078 786 1698. Call or WhatsApp or email us at info@belmontmayer.com. Elevate your financial future with Belmont Mayer, where every detail matters.
When you give water, you bring life to drought-affected communities, providing fresh water for drinking, cleaning, and growing. Your support helps Islamic Relief implement water, sanitation, and hygiene projects, providing clean water to communities around the world. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists, with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities, conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Tonight, a child in a shack will try to sleep through the cold. No heating, no insulation, just thin walls and a biting cold. African Muslims Agency is on the ground, reaching families in informal settlements across South Africa with blankets and winter essentials. Help us spread warmth this winter. For 180 Rand, give a blanket. For 360 Rand, a full winter pack. One gift, one less night in the cold. Africa Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
At Dynasty Islamic, we believe your financial future should grow with purpose and in line with your values. We specialize in Sharia-compliant financial solutions designed to protect, grow, and preserve your wealth. Whether it's investment planning, risk cover, or structuring your legacy, Our approach is rooted in transparency, integrity, and ethical principles. Too often, people invest without knowing if their money aligns with their beliefs. At Dynasty Islamic, we change that, offering you clarity, confidence, and peace of mind. Let us help you build a future that's not only financially secure, but spiritually aligned. Dynasty Islamic, where your wealth meets your values. Get in touch with us at info@dynastyislamicfas.co.za, visit www.dynastyislamic.com, or find us on Facebook and Instagram.
It's a new beginning. It's a new era. Salam Media, humanitarian journalism.
Well, we continue our discussion this evening with my guests, Hassen, Seria, and Dr. Ali Alsayegh out of Kuwait this evening, talking about lessons 100 days into the attack on Iran by the United States and Israel. Dr. Ali, let's just talk about Israel and what this actually means for Israel. Now, we've seen Western media talking about Donald Trump aggressively intervening, trying to prevent Netanyahu to, with regards to further attacks, further escalations and the like. And we've also seen a few weeks ago the pressure on the Arab countries as well, particularly with regards to the Abrahamic Accords, normalization with Israel, trying to pressure them into normalizing with Israel. But where does this actually place Israel in terms of its broader objectives and its ambitions, after we see the response, how Iran has actually responded to the attacks? And, when one looks at Israel, for example, there's always been talk about the Greater Israel Project, that, there's been a very ambitious project as far as Israel is concerned, Dr. Ali.
Thanks a lot, Inayat. And this is a really important and a great question. Let's start off with why this war started in the first place. Was it really in U.S. national interest? It clearly wasn't. It was something that was in the interest of Israel, the Israeli project for the region, weakening one of the main countries that are able to violently retaliate to Israel in case they do engage in their Greater Israel Project, expanding within the region. And what has happened since the war started is that we see Iran constantly gaining more and more leverage, and it's getting, I think, the United States to a state of desperation. They are not able to force those concessions from Iran. Donald Trump is clearly, on the one hand, either delusional or is not able to fathom to what extent the United States does not have any leverage over Iran within the context of the ongoing negotiations, and that they can't force Iran to accept the demands that the US is putting forward. And we can see that obviously through the recent moves that the Iranians have been doing by attacking Israel when it started to attack Bahia, or threatening to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Even reportedly, and it hasn't been confirmed yet, shooting down a U.S. helicopter in the Strait of Hormuz. And we're seeing them also engaging sometimes in tactics of escalating further than the U.S. Attack. Sometimes the U.S. does attack during the ceasefire. As Donald Trump defines ceasefires, it's just when the attacks are a little bit more moderate. But when the Iranians respond, it's not proportionate, it's disproportionate, and that shows to what extent Iran is comfortable to respond disproportionately as well. Though there is an important point to be made here. I think the US, what Donald Trump really wants to do is he wants to extend this period of time of this moderate ceasefire where we see attacks happening every once in a while until we can get past the midterms. And when he gets past the midterms and he ensures that Republicans don't lose as many seats as it's forecasted that they will lose, he'll be on more steady grounds to resume this war. Obviously, this could happen earlier, but this really depends on a lot of factors that could happen in a moment's notice that are a lot of times unexpected. And what I think the Israelis and when we talk about Israel, we're talking about one of the best espionage systems in the region, arguably in the world. And obviously, the Israelis have had a knack for being able to trick Donald Trump and twist his thinking, because obviously he's not a military strategist, he's not a politician, he's a businessman. It's you can convince him for that this war will inevitably benefit the United States by arguing that, when the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the oil lobby in the United States will be able to sell their oil for more, and he'll be convinced. He'll think to himself, "Oh yeah, this is a really good idea. Why shouldn't we do this?" But what will happen eventually, I think, and obviously take this with a pinch of salt, because the factors around this war, the variables change every single day, is that the US will come to a realization that Iran is not going to budge on any of their demands, and they are increasingly becoming a regional hegemon. Through obviously this newfound control that they have over the Strait of Hormuz, and obviously their ability to retaliate against the US and Israel. And what this will do, possibly, is cause the United States to think about a ground invasion. And if the United States enters into a ground invasion against Iran, it will severely weaken Iran. And eventually, I think it will result in a new Vietnam where the US inevitably loses, but nevertheless, it will severely weaken Iran and it will allow Israel to take a back seat. And if that does happen, say 2-3 years from now, after a failed ground invasion, we're going to see a weakened Iran that is still nevertheless, victorious over the United States, but an Israel that has been able to take a back seat and replenish its resources, which will allow it to engage in its expansionist policies all over the region, and try to manifest and make this greater Israel project come to fruition. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but it seems like it could go in this direction. This is, I think, one of the major scenarios that could manifest over the next couple of months and years.
Yes, but also I think, from what Dr. Ali is saying, Hassen, as well, in terms of the scenarios that could play out, and the question would be, will the United States, will Donald Trump, will his mega movement in the United States ever achieve stable ground? Because when one looks at Iran as well, we've seen the restoration on the part of Iran as far as its regional standing is concerned, and also to an extent its global standing. Because what we see playing out on the global stage, we see the sentiments towards Iran at this point in time, because the key issue here for the United States of America is, do they have what it takes to make the sacrifices to survive like the Iranians have done? Because we've already starting to see how they've been crippled by high fuel prices, gas prices, and the likes as well. And at this point in time, there's a lot that is taking place internally and domestically in terms of the sentiments that people are expressing towards their own government and Donald Trump.
Indeed, I think that the American system is also equally still a strong system, even if we talk of the American system as no longer being the superpower which it once was. The reality is that the American system, I think, can weather this. And even with any sort of blowback or any sort of opposition from within, the system has in place the mechanisms. The Americans do still control, by and large, the narrative around the world to be able to withstand on that level. I think if, for example, the Americans do continue with the military aspect, there may arise questions about the capacity of the Americans, how this will wear down the Americans, even if they are able to wear down the Iranians as well. The biggest issue in my necessarily Iran. Iran, to a degree, is the frontier here, but the actual challenge is with China. And I think this is reflected sort of in the visit of Donald Trump to China, even post this war with Iran, or the active conflict. I mean, he went to China as such with a bloody nose. If we looked at the reality on the ground, so I think that is where the question lies. Is, for example, with the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, how tenable is the situation? Is it something that the Americans can continue for, and for how much longer? For how much longer can they have this amount of troops within the region? What is going to happen to the bases, for example, in the Gulf countries as well, the American presence there? How is the Americans going to maintain the system? I think it's an interesting point that Dr. Alsayegh has also fielded here in terms of the possibility of American boots on the ground. And I think if we look at the purges within the American military, the indication is that there is some sort of a plan underway during this period as well for the Americans to still go ahead, because Donald Trump is not somebody who allows himself to lose. He needs a win. And yes, he's been trying to achieve that through statements at the moment. But at the end of the day, I think the question is, what is that move going to be, and what is the outcome of that move? And I think that will decide the future here, not just of the region, but also in terms of the global resetting of the stage and who falls where.
Well, I think it's a very interesting comment that you made, and perhaps, Dr. Ali, we'd like to just expand on this, because one cannot look at Iran as an isolated conflict, because what we've seen, even in the case of Gaza as well, and the point that we've been making over and over again in terms of Gaza, that will determine what a new world order would look like. And when one looks at how Iran has actually framed this attack as well, and even through its support from countries like Russia and China as well. So in the bigger picture, or the broader context, one can start talking about a new international order, perhaps as well.
Perhaps, and that is something that we have to bear in mind. When the US declines in terms of its power, that also means its sphere of influence is going to become more narrow. That also means that we are entering, as Hassen rightly said, into an increasingly multipolar system. And I think Iran is pushing for this in their own way. They have their own vision of what this multipolar system is going to look like in the Middle East. They are drawing those battle lines, not in Tehran, as once it was, in the beginning of this war. Now the battle lines are in Dahya, Lebanon. Now now they are increasingly calling for the battle lines to be in Gaza as well. And this reflects that they are trying to create their own hegemonic vision for our framework for how the Middle East is going to operate, where the red lines are. And that is an important point that you make for sure. And I think China, in whether we think about it in this way or not, is the winner here. They are still getting their oil from Iran. Obviously, there are some limitations as to the oil they get from the Gulf, though that has not been cut out, I think, completely. There have been a couple of reports here and there that indeed there are oil ships that are carrying oil, or ships that are carrying gas, that are still going to Southeast Asia, to countries such as China, Japan, and even South Korea. And what China has done here, and I think they have done this really well, which is that they are seeing the United States making a mistake, and they're not intervening. They are allowing the United States to make that mistake. And what that does is I think, weakens the United States further, and that will inevitably have consequences in the dynamic between China and the United States. And that will give, I think, China a lot more room to maneuver. So that's an important point to bear in mind, and something that I'd like to just double on in terms of what Hassen has mentioned in terms of Trump trying to win this war, or claim that he has won this war through statements. I think that is a really important point, and it must be said that he can't win this war through statements because now the war is bigger than Donald Trump. It is not about Donald Trump anymore. It's about US hegemony. It is about dynamics that are far more complicated than he can understand. And at the end of the day, look, gas prices talk louder than his statements. And that is just a fact that he has to live with. He can't say anything now and just, pull himself out of this conflict. And
Well, I think let's just see if we won't be having this discussion in the next 100 days again, Hassen and Dr. Ali as well. And I think for the time being, we will obviously tap into Truth Social for entertainment purposes, for want of a better term. But unfortunately, time is obviously of the essence. But once again, to both of you, Jazakallah so much for taking time out with us right here on Salam Media. And once again, a very, I would say, robust discussion, but also highly informative as well, as we've unpacked this, the 100 days and some of the critical issues that obviously have come out in the last 100 days with the attack on Iran. But for now, both of you, Jazakallah once again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Hassen, Seria and Dr. Ali Alsayegh with us this evening. And that brings us to the end of another edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. Just to remind you that the podcast and clips, a lot obviously will be out. Please be make sure that you get into Salam Media, into our social platforms as well, whether you're talking about Instagram, Facebook, TikTok as well. So all of these platforms are available where you can catch clips of tonight's program, but also the full podcast will be made available as well. And with that, I'm going to be signing off from myself and the team here at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.